what you are looking at is a rendition of the Emerald Tablets. See? It's the Emerald Tablet. And these letters that you see, these glyphs, are actually Atlantean characters. These are Atlantean, the language of Atlantis. We're going to talk about Atlantis today. Amazingly enough, I never talked about Atlantis. Maybe I mentioned it in passing. But this entire video is going to be about Atlantis, and I'm going to get into the Emerald Tablets, which is, you could call it an artifact of Atlantis, but you could also call it a mystical I don't want to call it a relic because it's still alive, it's still useful. It's a mystical masterpiece. You see, an archaeologist would call something a relic or an artifact. This is not. This is a tool. This is a magical device. It's the Emerald Tablets. Let's go back and talk about Atlantis first. Atlantis is like this mythical civilization that nobody seems to believe in completely because there's lack of evidence. It seems to be just a legend. It's just some kind of a fictional story that may have come through some of the ancient cultures of 4,000 years ago, or 3,000 years ago. The primary one that we think of in the Western world is the Greeks, the ancient Greeks. What did the ancient Greeks think of Atlantis? Well, one of the Greeks, whose name is Plato, wrote an entire work. And in that, he described Atlantis. And this is where a lot of the information comes from in the modern world. The information that the scientists accept. But there are many more works other than Plato. And this translation of the Emerald Tablets is by a writer known as Doreal. This is his interpretation and his translation of the Emerald Tablets. Wow. So you thought Plato was the only one who could tell you about Atlantis. Not so. Now I'm going to give you this basic premise right here. This is big, so listen carefully. Atlantis is connected with ancient Egypt. For all intents and purposes, Egypt would not have risen to the heights that we can distinguish today unless it was for the influence of the Atlanteans. Now let's backtrack to this whole idea of the disbelief. Now why wouldn't you believe that there was civilization on the planet? Why couldn't you believe that? You believe that there was Atlantis. You believe that there was Egypt because you can see the pyramids and the temples and the statues and the monuments, the obelisks, so on and so forth, and the Sphinx. And you think you can date that back to 4,500 years ago, 5,000 years ago, maybe 6,000 years ago. You can see Stonehenge, you can see other megalithic architecture, works that have survived the fall of the civilization. You see Machu Picchu, you see all of these ruins around the world. Can you imagine how many more must be underneath the sea because the shifting of the water and the glaciers and the shifting of the sand, the shifting of the jungles? So many more civilizations and ruins that could be underneath the Sahara Desert, or underneath the Atlantic Ocean, or underneath the Pacific. And how about underneath the Gobi Desert? One of the harshest climates on the earth. Very few people would undertake an expedition to explore the Gobi. It's virtually unknown. And imagine what kind of civilizations must be underneath the ice on the continent of Antarctica. Now, we don't know anything about these civilizations, and yet many of us are going to be in disbelief of Atlantis. How could information be passed down for thousands and thousands of years without any physical evidence? You don't want to believe that, do you? Well, I do. Because I'm not closed-minded. I'm not arrogant like that. I don't go around thinking that this modern Western world is the highest the earth has ever been to. Really? This is the highest? The shit that we offer now, the pollution, the wars, the starvation, the ignorance, the cheap thrills, the fast food, this is the highest that civilization's ever been on the planet? Pointing nuclear missiles at everybody, and bio-warfare, chemical warfare. This is the height that we've risen to. It's never been higher than this, right? I've never heard anything that could be so arrogant and ignorant at the same time. Mohandas K. Gandhi once said, "Western civilization? That wouldn't be a great idea." In other words, we aren't civil. And to think that in all the history of this planet, even the scientists say that this planet's been here for billions of years. Well, if it has, how can you tell me that before 5,000 years ago, there wasn't anything, there was no people, there was no organized culture? No, it's just garbage. It's a garbage theory. And that is the starting point for you to wake up to the idea about Atlantis being here. It was the height of civilization in prehistoric times. Prehistoric. And some of us on the planet today, we come from Atlantis. Some of us physically can trace our genetics back to Atlantis. Very, very few of us. Just spread out there. You know, to trace something back, like way back, that's very difficult. But some of us do. And the most important part is that some of us can trace our souls back to Atlantis, because we are the reincarnated dwellers, citizens of Atlantis. That's how we know. All of the people that believe in Atlantis at this time, that's because we were there. How can we deny it? Yeah, we know we were there. That was such a long time ago. And we're still here on the earth. This is a really big subject. I don't even know if we're going to be able to touch the Emerald Tablets today, but this is one of the great works of literature. It is a mystery from Atlantis. This work right here is called a literal translation of one of the most ancient and secret of the great works of ancient wisdom. And on that note, I'm going to close, and you'll have to come back next time to hear more about Atlantis.